It's the red button.
Is it on? Good evening, friends from the Hermitage on Camano Island. This evening we'll begin with a song, but in the meantime, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to Hriman and Padma this evening, go to our Facebook page and just go in the comment section and post your question there.
We'll begin with Larks Fly High by Swami Kriyananda, and we'll finish at the end of the satsang with a lullaby.
Larks fly high in the summer sky, regardless of the weather. Even so, we too can ascend up high, as long as we soar together.
A kindly hand who can understand, and kindness helps awaken every thought of love that our souls demand, when for lofty desires are mistaken.
Larks fly high in the summer sky, regardless of the weather. Even so, we too can ascend up high, as long as we soar together. A kindly hand can understand, and kindness helps awaken every thought of love that our souls demand, when for long desires are mistaken. Every thought of love that our souls demand, when for long desires are mistaken.
Beautiful, thank you.
Welcome everybody. By the way, that Facebook page is called what? Sita Ananda Seattle and Bothell, is that the correct term?
Correct.
Yeah, and you can type in their remarks, very positive remarks, of course, and we can chat. Okay, well, let's start with prayer together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, Beloved God,
Friend, Beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Beloved Guru,
Beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Saints of East and West,
Saints of East and West,
Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda,
Friend and Guide Swamiji,
be with us this evening.
be with us this evening.
Help us to be strong,
Help us to be strong,
with courage in our lives,
with courage in our lives,
joyful, positive attitudes,
joyful, positive attitudes,
so that we can be instruments of a higher power,
so that we can be instruments of a higher power.
Thy power,
Thy power,
Thy grace,
Thy grace,
Thy light.
Thy light.
Om.
Om.
Peace. Amen. Okay. So, well, welcome everyone. Some of our farm staff is away this evening, but
Some of our farm staff is here this evening.
and some are here.
And so is Mr. Rick Skillman.
We have Mr. Rick Skillman, famously known as the brother of Peter Skillman. So, Padma, what do we have on the agenda here
Well,
tonight?
I wrote this.
Uh-huh.
You want to read it?
No, I don't, actually. I mean, since you wrote it. Go ahead.
I didn't write it.
I can read it.
Swami Kriyananda. Thank you.
Yoni for the same.
In society, generally speaking, the impetus for any upliftment of consciousness depends on women and on feminine influence. Any society that refuses to respect its woman is self-condemned to remain or become backward and degraded. Swami Kriyananda.
You see why I didn't want to read it? I didn't even look at it, but I knew.
I just thought it was a very timely quote to bring up about from Swami Kriyananda, not about Swami Kriyananda.
What's its source? A book?
You know, that's a really good question. I just had it on my computer as something that he had written.
Uh-huh.
It probably was from a book, but
Sounds like it. I mean, I recognize the statement, but I don't remember its source.
you know, Paramahansa Yogananda, the one whose teachings we practice at Ananda, gave a great deal of, what's the right word, emphasis to Divine Mother in his life. He worshipped Divine Mother. He spoke to Divine Mother all the time. He was incredibly close to his own mother. And in fact, he lost her when he was just, I think, 9 years old or something. And later in life, he wrote that beautiful poem, Dark Eyes, as a reflection of his Divine Mother, in honor of the Divine Mother through his mother. In fact, in that poem, which is in Whispers from Eternity, the book we're reading from every day, so eventually we'll get there, he talks about the fact that Divine Mother said to him that I have always watched over you through the incarnations, through those dark eyes of his mother, his Divine Mother. So the feminine energy plays a very important part spiritually. And in Swami Kriyananda's own life, he was particularly close with his mother, who he described as a very spiritual woman. We got to meet her. She was very, very dignified, not in a, chin in the air kind of dignified looking down, but dignified in the true sense of being completely poised and relaxed in herself, and very comfortable in herself, and yet very, very gracious, and you just automatically could tell that she was a very special person. And that reminds me of just a little image. I remember traveling with Swami Kriyananda, and we were checking into a hotel in New York City, and the bellhop was taking us first to Swami Kriyananda's room, Swamiji, we like to call him, and then he was going to escort me to my room with my luggage. Anyway, we're in Kriyananda's room, and he's putting the luggage away, the bellhop is, and Kriyananda's looking out the window, and the bellhop turns to me and says, "He's a special person, isn't he?" Somehow people could tell that there was a unique and high soul there. And so the appreciation of that balance of masculine and feminine, and Swami Kriyananda in his own being was an amazing balance of that masculine and feminine. He had a keen eye for beauty. He had a keen eye for rhythm and eloquence in words, and just a refinement that comes to a soul who has balanced those two aspects of his nature, which the masculine and feminine exists within each and every one of us. And it's a question of bringing those two forces into balance within our own nature to release us from duality and into that oneness. So anyway, I found this particular quote.
So are you going to open it up, or?
I am, but
Okay.
I first want to hear if you have anything to
Not going to
say.
touch that one with a 10-foot. No, it's obvious that the influence of the feminine aspect of consciousness is needed for the salvation of the planet. It's the contrast of that is intimated here, which, take a look at any society that exists today even, but surely in the past, that was unbalanced in either way, but we don't have any examples really historically of being unbalanced in the feminine direction. So take a look at that and you'll see the aggression and the violence, etc., that results from that. I don't know what would happen if we had societies and centuries of matriarchy exactly. I'm sure that could be unbalanced too, but that's not exactly our problem in human history today. We definitely need the balance. My comment on this really is from the male perspective, not surprisingly. But not only is this needed, but what I see is that the change in consciousness that brings us towards equality, which is so necessary, is disabling certain souls, not a few. I see a lot of young men who are completely lost. The old forms of tradition of provider and protector and whatever are being dissolved in the name, as they should, of equality. And so you have young men who are perhaps effeminate, perhaps are lacking in the positive values of masculinity, who are lost, they don't know where to go, they don't know what to be. They're weak, they're weak-minded, morally weak. And so the underbelly of this trend, which is so necessary, has casualties, because the consciousness of the planet is still a long way from equality. But as it spreads, and in the countries like ours where it is first and foremost, we see that men are not, generally speaking, as articulate, in some ways not as intelligent, or are intelligent in different ways. But in a world where cooperation and getting along with people and working together, as opposed to being independent and in charge and taking over, and that sort of competing, when you have a cooperative society instead of a competitive society, and you have how many thousands of years of that being dominant, you're going to have a lot of souls who are going to be lost. And as much as I totally value the other that we're talking about, I'm also very keenly aware, when I look around me at young men in their teens, but especially their 20s, who really don't have a clue. Unless they're in the technical professions, and they could be in the building professions, but not enough are being attracted to that. They should be. There's a great future in that in this country, but But unless you're in medicine or tech, there's not much out there really. No one's looking to you for support. Nobody's looking to you for leadership. It's right that the young women coming up are being given these opportunities. You can't argue with that. But I do see these young fellows who even traditionally would not come into their own until their late 20s, early 30s, sort of on a metabolical level, let's just say. But at this point, I see a lot of casualties in our society with the video games and even some of the real dark stuff where there's a word for it, where they are against women and are angry and resentful because they don't attract any, given how they are behaving and so forth. So that's an underbelly side that no one seems to talk about. And it's been on my mind many times as I look around at those young guys. So there you have it.
I didn't know we were going in that
Well,
direction.
That's what you get for pulling a rabbit out of the hat.
Sita.
So, no questions per se, but B is watching from San Antonio.
Okay, hi B.
She says, "I'm so happy you've all been putting so much online. I really appreciate being able to stay in touch a little bit," and she misses everyone.
Say B, I wish you could see those pavers at the temple that you were the instrument to provide. It just has uplifted the energy, and not just the pavers, but along with those pavers has come a plethora of flowers. We had a work day last Saturday at the temple for gardening and pruning and so forth, and we just had so much fun. There were 8 or 10 of us out there. So thank you. Your vibration, your memory, your influence lives on at the Ananda Blue Lotus Temple landscaping.
Come and visit if it gets too hot where you are. So, any other comments or thoughts about any of this?
It seems like it's one of those teachings that it would take a certain level of maturity to understand it in the right way. And I wonder, as a whole society, how much longer before we get to that refinement of understanding to understand the difference between purely women and the feminine aspect of the divine and how to approach it. It seems like it would take a little bit of maturity to really understand that in the right way.
That's for sure. And yet, even, in the early days of my growing up, the so-called sexual revolution, and then all the other such revolutions that have come, San Francisco and the gay movement in my day, and then now other things, transgender. There's different ways of looking at these issues, but from the standpoint of Swamiji's comment, and I think how many of us think, I see that as a deeper than conscious urge to transcend the stereotypes of sexuality and gender and stereotypical roles that we play in the so-called war of the sexes. There's just an innate push to, not play the games and play the roles there. And I recall thinking, even when I was young and in my 20s and came to Ananda, that how grateful I was that, the women there who were all at that time young, like myself at that time, I was just very grateful for the fact that there was really none of that. People were just themselves. People weren't playing gender stuff. The way men and women behaved and dressed and so forth was just very modest and simple, and it was so refreshing coming out of the 60s and the Bay Area, as I grew up in California, in the middle of the whole hippie thing, and it was just so refreshing. So I think a lot of the turmoil in our trying to find our sexual identities and stuff like that, I'm not saying it's all positive, but it doesn't matter. I think for me the the spiritual impulse on the subject that we're talking about is a deep impulse to transcend those issues. I mean, there are the social issues of acceptance of different lifestyles, fine, all of that stuff, the legal, the social, fine. But I think from the soul perspective, it represents an urge to be bigger than just gender influences or social and cultural influences and those roles which are so, they don't fit. So many people, they just don't fit. The poor people stuck in the wrong body, you know, all that stuff. It's the soul wants to be free. And that's how I prefer to look at it.
The other aspect of it is the yugas, and having come from the institutional age, Kali Yuga, and we're moving into Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy, which is the breaking up of those institutions. And Yogananda talks about this in his teachings, that this is another form of breaking up an institution, an institutional understanding of how genders must behave, and an acceptance that, you know, we can break out of those molds and be more soulful in our expressions. But yeah, the world isn't generally catching up to that, or nor will it probably for quite a while. Dwapara Yuga is 2,400 years, and we're just a couple of hundred years into it. So it's going to take time, but it's moving in the right direction, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, you see not just certain countries and cultures and religions that are completely the opposite, but even amongst our own here in America, you see more sort of fundamentalist affirming those stereotypical roles, you know, the proverbial woman at home kinds of stereotypes. So yeah, it's going to be a while, even though people like you and I and the people that we tend to associate with are much more free. And it's just such a wonderful environment to be yourself.
We were just talking before we started tonight with Peony, and with the, you know, there's quite an age range between Peony's age and my age, but when we're all gathered in these ways and connecting with each other, we're all peers with each other. It just is natural that way. It's about souls, and it's not about physical age or bodies or genders or, you know, any color, any of those outer forms when we live a life of spirit.
You know, there's a sort of as the society experiments with freedom, there's sort of a flip side, which I remember Swami saying something like, men are better at being men, and women are better at being women. And what I mean by that would be encapsulated in the phrase brothers and sisters, because there is a part of the movement, at least earlier in our lives, where the affirmation from the leading edge of consciousness was that there was no difference. And gosh, anybody who raises children can disabuse us of that. I mean, I have 2 grandchildren, I have 4 of them, but 2 of them, there's a boy and a girl. And I don't care what you say out there, the little boy likes the trucks and the little girls like the fairies, you know, I mean, and their parents are very, you know, gender neutral, so to speak. So there are some differences, and so maybe a good way to think of this sort of freedom is ourselves as brothers and sisters. So not denying the differences and the attractions and differences, meaning sometimes we don't get along because we see things differently. I don't mean just the obvious physical differences. And so brothers and sisters, if you ever grew up with a brother or sister, you know that you have different views on things, and sometimes you get along, sometimes you don't. So it's a more realistic way, rather than to this affirmation that there are no differences in the way we think and behave and express ourselves and so forth. It's a very healthy way, I think, to view one another as brothers and sisters.
Okay, I just put that one away.
Very good. We're done with that.
Sita, do you have another one? And if not, do you have one for us yourself?
There, B says, great idea about visiting if it gets too hot. And Carol's watching, and Haley, and Amy from Ananda, Portland.
Oh, fun.
Oh, Amy. Hi, Amy.
Does anyone else? Rick, did you have one? Otherwise I have something. But do you have a question?
Well, I wanted to say that as a possible CEO, dealing with physicians who were mostly men, and physicians in their training were brought up to be very firm and being right. And I had to learn how to work with them by appreciating their humanness, that they were human beings with the same hopes and dreams that I had, and that they were simply struggling in their own way to find a way to express that. And their mode was through this highly technical field. But the way I gained success with them was through not trying to reach them at that level of male kind of competitiveness, because to be a physician was highly competitive. Their whole training was competitive. I became more successful with them by embracing them as humans, as people, and acknowledging, let them know that I acknowledged that in them. And once they recognized that in me, then we were able to have a more rich relationship and accomplish more things within the context of a hospital.
Thank you. That's very nice. Sita Ji, you got one.
Yeah, during seclusion last week, I picked up Sadhu Beware, light reading. So my question comes from just the introduction, if I may read it. It says, in the normal course of events, a renunciate order defines itself by the contrast it forms with society as a whole. A renunciate is, or should be, wholly dedicated to seeking and serving God. Most people in society are dedicated to worldly pursuits and ego gratification. In Ananda Sangha, this contrast is less definite, for all who join Ananda do so in order to seek and serve God. And this sentence is where my question will come from. They should already understand, moreover, their need to transcend ego consciousness by doing God's will rather than their own. And so there's sincerity when people say, I want to do God's will, not my own. But what are some clues, if you're being a detective, to know if you're doing your own will or God's? And I know it's not so black and white, like that's God's will, that's yours, but how do you get there and keep, and you know what I'm trying to ask?
I think so. Do you know?
No idea.
No, you get to go first this time.
How do you know when you're doing God's will or your own? What are some clues or cues that can help
I've
you?
always found, sort of as a person, and I'm, there's two kind of people. Anyway, what I mean is sometimes, and Swami would say this, I didn't get this from him, but if you exaggerate your attitude, you can see where it leads. Okay, his example that he said in guiding a community when he was training us or guiding an individual, he said it's like a train track, and I grew up around trains and that sort of thing. That's a cool, because he said, where does the train go? Where do the tracks go? And when it's my will, and if I were to exaggerate my commitment to it being my will, there's going to be tension. And when it's a divine dharmic will, even if to do it is difficult, there's going to be an inward sense of rightness and relaxation. Now, that's not going to come unless you are trying to do God's will, unless you have an inner life of meditation and prayer and service, admittedly, you know. But nonetheless, in our context, we're all striving to do that. So it's that level of tension that that I associate when it's what I want. That when something's hard, I can name a number of situations where I had to do or say something that was very difficult, and even where I could be emotionally more committed than I'd like to be, but it was right. There was an inner sense of rightness that made doing what was difficult to do, because there was some ego involvement, possible to do and have it work out. Does that make any sense?
It does. It resonate. I couldn't explain it back to you, but it resonated in a way that was helpful. So, yeah.
What comes to my mind with this question is usually, you know, where do I live, or what do I do? What kind of service do I offer? And of course, within the context of Ananda, which has been my whole adult life, that means, what service to Ananda am I offering? And, you know, I'm somebody who, I know my blacks from my whites. I have my opinion about things. I have many opinions.
You should change your colors.
Yeah, I should change my colors. My blues from my greens.
No, blue and red.
I like blue and green. Leave me alone. But what I'm saying is, because I have no trouble, you know, I grew up in Holland, where when you ask somebody in Holland what would they like, this piece of toast or that piece of cheese or something, they're going to tell you, I want that one, or I want this one. When I came to America, this was one of my culture shocks. If I say to somebody, would you like this one or this one, they go, I don't care. You decide. I don't care. Well, where I grew up, you cared. And you made your preference known, you know. And so learning early on as a young adult to put my own preferences in the back seat and to do what I was asked to do, to serve where I was guided to serve, that was freeing. It was hard. It was sometimes incredibly hard, but it was freeing to just not be the one to initiate my own will in the circumstances. And it's like insurance, you know, when you're not the one initiating it, the chances are at least better that your ego is not going to be in it as much, if at all. And so,
That's helpful.
yeah.
Thank you. You know who just joined us is Tanis.
Tanis, all right.
Hi, Tanis.
Tanis. What, does she have a question?
No, no.
She's just saying hi.
Well, I don't know. Do you, Tanis?
You know, it's an interesting contrast because maybe Rick too, but I grew up with the opposite. If you were asked what you wanted, you would say, whatever. In other words, you were not taught in the Irish community or the Catholic community to express your desires or your will. And so the interesting thing,
You were taught to suck it up, though.
Suck it up, puppy. That's my mother, my Mio's mother would say, offer it up to Jesus, and I would offer it up to Jesus. But what's interesting about that, quite apart from which cultural divide you come from, is that what Swamiji taught us was really something new in spirituality. He showed us that on the path of self-realization in the age of Dwapara Yuga, and Master taught this quite strongly, the need for initiative and creativity in the context of spirituality, in the context of renunciation, even in the context of what we call in our own religious order cooperative obedience. And it's a new form of renunciation. It's a new form of spiritual living where you have the initiative to go out and do things, and your intention is to do them with God, for God, etc., is a whole new paradigm that the two contrasts before would seem to be the contrast of ego and spirit, but they weren't. They were both ego. You know, the whatever paradigm or I want paradigm are just still superiority, inferiority. And Swamiji, more than anyone, though Master taught it, but many of his chief disciples did not at all reflect this. Neither Rajasi, neither Gyanamata, none of them. But Swamiji was a creative volcano, and he showed that the path of renunciation into Dwapara Yuga would be one in which self-effort was the leading edge to open us up to the flow of grace. This is a new teaching. I mean, nothing's new, but okay. But historically speaking, this is a powerful new paradigm. And so when you ask a question like that, that's where community, in other words, I have creativity and initiative, but I ask people who I have some respect or trust for. You know, there's other aspects to that, but it makes it a lot more difficult in some ways to really...
There's another aspect to it, though, which is embracing, so that it's not a passive process by which you accept guidance, perhaps, in a certain direction. I learned this a lot working with Swami Kriyananda when he would initiate things, is I couldn't just say, yes, you know, and do it in that attitude sort of passively simply because he said so. I had to embrace it genuinely, wholeheartedly, not as a martyr, and really put my shoulder into it, lean into it, do it, and see for myself whether it was a good idea or not a good idea, and good for my soul or not good for my soul. But it's in the embracing and the wholehearted throwing into it that you're like not attached to it any longer. You can release. It's not sticking to the wall. It's not a karma created by you. It's a freeing, true karma yogic kind of expression.
You know, it brings us immediately all the way back to the Bhagavad Gita. The central teaching of the Gita is that we must act. And he says in the Gita, Krishna says, Arjuna's pestering him with all these questions, and he says, how do you know what's right? He asked, in a sense, the same question. And Krishna says, you don't. You don't know, really, until you act. And you see whether you go towards inner freedom, detachment, and unleash creativity, fine, but there's a sense of freedom or not. You won't know, you know, how did they on the battlefield today? The very first line of the Bhagavad Gita, how did they today? You do not really know whether you made the right decision until you've made the decision and you see the results of what we do. So it really is one of those core questions of the spiritual life that are very difficult to answer.
But that's a very helpful teaching, because you can get into what is that, analysis paralysis, where you're just waiting and waiting until the right thing to do, and just reflecting what was the outcome. You actually have to do it to know, and there's never going to be like, that's it, boom, go. So that's kind of helpful.
Yeah.
And in fact, it often leads you to something else and another direction. It's not that it's a direction in itself, but that direction leads you to yet another direction. That's where you were supposed to be going. Yeah. What have you got? You're smiling.
No, it's just fun to see people, like April's just joined in Jaidara at the village, and it's just really fun to see friends.
Yeah.
What is the name of the book that originally was called Crystal Clarity?
You mean in the arts?
I guess.
The art of creative.
I guess he has a sentence in there that stuck with me all my life. He said, "Action is clarifying."
Yeah.
And when you take action rather than paralysis, you can see for yourself whether or not the energy behind what you do is expansive or contractive, is ego affirming or soul affirming.
It's actually also a precept in intuition, isn't it, Sita, from our spiritual counseling course, that until you move into it and act on your intuition, you won't know if it's a right intuition or not. You have to actually act on it, just like the Gita says.
But you always share in spiritual counseling, I say always because I keep retaking it, is that if you don't keep checking back in,
Yeah.
you could have kept going straight when you should have.
Yeah, you want to take a step at a time. Yeah, you definitely don't want to run for the goal line and think you're done.
Because that's just so human nature to be like, oh God, please tell me the answer. Okay, there it is. I know exactly what to do, and I'm just going to...
And you know how that has played out in Ananda's short history of 50 years, especially in the beginning when we just had so few resources, is it goes to the heart of those who want things to be perfect, but because things are inevitably not perfect, or at least when you're resource shy or you haven't learned how to do what you've been asked to do, it's not going to be perfect. Swami showed us that you just start moving in that direction. You write a book, you print a book, you build a building, you whatever, and it's better to get something done and have it be less than ideal or perfect than to wait until the perfect circumstances, or you know perfectly, you're self-confident. I remember, what was that question Swami said to you at the fundraiser you like to quote after you gave your presentation? And he said we would raise the funds because it's the right thing to do, not just because we can raise the funds. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? And because Ananda started off on a shoestring, the ability to get things done, to build buildings, to start schools, to do the retreat, all these things that had to be done, they were funky. I mean, really funky. I think of the house up on the ridge that the Lee family lived in. I mean, they want to tear that old thing down. But you know, it got us going. And that's important to realize. Because it's, why? Because the path of yoga is all about energy, not form. The form does not have to be perfect if the energy is right. It'll work out. And energy has its own innate intelligence.
Actually, that reminds me of something that Swamiji used to say so many times. He would say to us, if the spirit is right, everything will turn out just as it should.
Yeah.
If the spirit is right. And he would say that sometimes when, to our eyes, the person who had just been given this new job or this new situation or sent to lead this new department or community, And we would just roll our eyes, like, is that really going to work? Ha ha. And he would say, if the Spirit's right,
Yeah.
everything will turn out just as it should. And it always did. I mean, that's the amazing part. That's the beauty of it, because it would be far from perfect. But it would turn out just as it should. And, it's a principle that just holds true. So
What did Haridas say? We're building character, not buildings, or something like that.
Guess
Yeah.
who just tuned in? Miss Geeta Matlock.
really, hey boo boo, Gita.
Oh.
Gita, tonight I showed Peony Tulsi's little Marco Polo with the horse. It was really sweet. So, if the Spirit's right, everything will turn out just as it should. I hate to say it, guys,
Hate to
but
say it.
we have to do our meditation now. I think it's your turn to. It's your turn to play a chant.
She's in the hot seat.
And we don't have to meditate, but we want to meditate, right?
Great.
I was wondering if you were going to catch that. April says, Namaste heart wave. Emojis to everyone.
Okay. Thank you, April.
What time is it? Oh my, okay. Let's meditate for just a few minutes together. Wherever we may be, virtually, let's transcend time and space by being here now, being present in our own hearts. Open the door of the heart and dive deep into the inner pool of peace. Commune with one another and with the Spirit within one another, feeling the presence of the Masters who have brought us together. Let us be still and know that in Thee we are one, we are free.
like to close with the healing affirmation for the world from Ananda Worldwide. Tonight I'm just going to say it through once. So please say it along mentally with me. With deep concentration, absorb these words into your consciousness. God's light is within me and around me. With the sword of faith in my hand, with the love of God in my heart, I am a warrior of light. I join my brothers and sisters everywhere to overcome fear with faith, hatred with love, and disease with health. We all are warriors of light. Let us all fill the world with God's light. Om Shanti. Amen. Now we'd like to offer a piece of music by Hriman and Padma. I'm sorry. Peony and Navashan. Sorry about that.
I'll channel my inner Pian.
Your inner Pian.
We'll be singing Irish Lullaby.
Oh, are you Irish, Peony?
In
Inner
spirit.
Irish.
Go to sleep, little dear, may the angels draw near, and with peace dust sprinkle your eyes.
May the curtain of night banish pain from your sight, that your dreams to heaven arise.
Forsake all care as your thoughts rise there through a vault of star-spangled skies. Go to sleep, little one, heaven's blessings you've won by the innocence of your smile.
May the whole of your life heal with calmness all strife, and teach kindness free from all guile.
Men's hearts enthralled by pure love for all, for its love makes living worthwhile. Go to sleep, little dear, may the angels draw near, and with peace does sprinkle your eyes. May the curtain of night banish pain from your sight, that your dreams to heaven arise. Forsake all care as your thoughts rise there through a vault of star-spangled skies. Go to sleep, little one, heaven's blessings you've won by the innocence of your smile. May the whole of your life heal with calmness all strife, and teach kindness free
His love makes living worthwhile.
Beautiful, thank you.
You mentioned your class, Padma, Tuesday night.
Tuesday night, Hriman says I should remind you all that it's on our website. I'm giving an online class on Zoom called The Mystery of Cultivating Habits. And I have a huge volume of Yogananda's teachings on the subject condensed into a precious hour for you. I hope you can join me that night. And tonight was Becca's class, right? So Sunday service is in person and online again this week. 9 o'clock meditation, 10 o'clock Sunday service. Both will be live streamed like they were last week, and we look forward to seeing you. And next Thursday again here, and of course weekdays at 12 o'clock with Whispers from Eternity. Anything else that I've forgotten? Okay, joy to you, and thank you for sharing this satsang with us. Bye-bye now.
Your dad's watching. Hi, Jacob's dad.